Good afternoon, Turks and Caicos. It's a beautiful Thursday afternoon here in Providenciales. And, of course, I got to say a good day to everybody that's got it locked into Tropical Vibes 105.5, 103.3 FM. And, of course, as they say, the heartbeat of the TCI. And you're tuned into another episode of the Patriot Hour. And today we're looking at immigration in the context of national development. And we got a hot show for you guys today. And, of course, I will let my guest introduce herself as always, just in case you're not aware of who she is. She's a wonderful, dynamic young lady here in the TCI. And, of course, now let the public know who you are.
Good afternoon, Turks and Caicos. My name is Sheba Wilson. I am the chairman of the Turks and Caicos Islands Immigration Board, now chairman of Zone 2, Providenciales, North Caicos, Middle Caicos, Parrot and Pine Key. I am also the assistant director of human resources at the Grace Bay Club. And I'm no stranger to Turks and Caicos. I'm very well known in this community and very active in this community. So I'm sure that our listeners today know exactly who I am.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. And we're going to jump right into it, Sheba. Now, the first thing I want to ask you is, what do you actually mean by Zone 2? You know, because that might have taken some people back, being as there have been some changes recently to the immigration law.
Yes, well, in the new immigration ordinance, there are now 2 immigration boards, or work permit boards, they'll be called. And the first is Zone 1, which is responsible for work permit applications for Grand Turk, South Caicos, and Salt Key. And that board will sit and look at applications in Grand Turk. And the second, Zone 2, would be Providenciales based, and the makeup of the board would include persons from all of the islands that I mentioned earlier, Providenciales, North and Middle Caicos, and as well as ex officio members. And then the Grand Turk board, Zone 1, Grand Turk, South Caicos, Salt Key board would also consist of persons from those islands.
Now, I know this wasn't on our schedule of questions, but I just find this interesting, and so I figured I'd touch on that before I go into my questions. So what are the benefits of having these 2 different boards?
Well, one of the major benefits really is in terms of the business community and being able to service those islands in a timely manner, particularly with Grand Turk, Salt Key, and South Caicos. What we've found over the years is that those applications collected on those islands, it then takes a long time for them to get to Providenciales, be logged, and form a part of the meeting agendas. And that in itself posed a problem for businesses, because you might have submitted an application 3-4 months earlier, and into month 5, it's just being placed on an agenda for whatever reason. Some of it might have been because the applications were not sent in time, or there were not enough applications to make it, I guess, cost-effective enough to send them. So that was a big challenge. And also receiving incomplete applications, because, for instance, on the island of South Caicos, there isn't an immigration board office there. So the receiving officer would be a regular member of the immigration department who may not have been knowledgeable about what was required to be collected. And so the applications would come in without relevant documents, and then they would have to be deferred, making the process even longer. And that's not business friendly. So that's something that the government has addressed, and that's the biggest pro of the new zoning, in my opinion.
Okay, now I'm going to put you in a difficult spot. Would there be any cons to this new zoning of the immigration and work permit process?
Well, I wouldn't say a con, but I will say that, you know, with anything new, it'll take some time for you to work out any kinks and get to see how it goes and if there's tweaking that's required. Also, it's going to be the first time that that island of Grand Turk is going to have a board presiding there. So the officers in that particular office in Grand Turk, in the work permit office in Grand Turk, they'll of course have to be trained and get to know the processes and the new legislation. And I'm pleased to say that they've already started that process of training the relevant staff, who will then be able to service the Zone 1 board. So that's going to be, I guess, the con, the the infancy stage, and getting to know how best to make the system work.
So I'm guessing the ultimate goal is cost effectiveness, streamlining the process,
Yes.
and looking for a faster turnaround time.
Yes, definitely. Of course, it's going to be a big cost to operate two boards versus one, but I think that in terms of delivery and meeting the needs of businesses in those communities, I think it's well worth it. And I'm hoping that the process doesn't take very long for it to work seamlessly.
Okay.
So.
Well, we've kind of put the cart before the horse here. Let's see if we can get back on track, And just for those of you out there, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Patriot Hour here on Tropical Vibes 105.5 and, of course, 103.5 FM. And they're also live via the web. That's Ustream, I think, / Tropical Vibes 105 FM, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so you can watch us live via Ustream. Or you can go to the Tropical Vibes Facebook page and click on the link on the Facebook page, and you can see what's going on. Now, Sheba, a lot of people, we use the word immigration so much. And I mean, that word is used in so many different contexts. But within the context of a country, what actually is immigration?
Well, basically, it is the management of persons that you allow to come into and exit your country. So that includes not just at your seaports or your airports, but also those persons that you would allow to reside permanently in your country, those persons that you will give temporary work status to, those persons that you allow to visit on visas. All of that encompasses immigration in a national context.
And what are some of the pros and cons of immigration? Because with everything, as you said, there are positives and there are not really negatives, but there are things that you have to work at.
Right. Well, we're talking about Turks and Caicos, so I'll be specific about Turks and Caicos. Cons. One of the issues that I think has existed for a very long time in terms of immigration in Turks and Caicos is the policing of the laws that we have. And I think it's simply that we know what the issues are, but we have not invested resources in the areas that they're very much needed. So in terms of, say, for instance, persons who might have been denied a work permit, a lot of times they remain in the territory, they remain in the country simply because we don't have adequate staffing, or we don't have the resources necessary to go after the individuals who might have stayed when they should have left, or to go after the employer who did not take the responsibility of making sure that the person has been repatriated. That is something, when you apply for a work permit, that is something that you sign on to. It's your responsibility, if the employment relationship comes to an end, to ensure that that person leaves. But it's also the responsibility of the government authorities to ensure that we are policing that, and to make sure that if companies or individuals who employ persons, they're not upholding their end of the bargain, so to speak, we do go after them and prosecute them, because we have to make people realize and understand that the law is important, and we have to uphold it, and we have to hold people accountable.
Now, I know in the past, we haven't seen where many people have been prosecuted, but we know the problem is a substantial one. Why do you think we haven't really gone after people from a legal context?
Sometimes I believe it's because we're a small, closely knit community, and even though we're not as small as we used to be, a lot of times it's kind of uncomfortable, I think, for officers to have to go after someone who may be a relative or who may be a friend, or and so you're more lenient towards persons who you may know. But we have to move past that as a country, because otherwise we open ourselves up to what we see happening now, a lot of illegal immigration, which is a big problem, especially when you have limited resources. So you don't compound the issue by being afraid to do what needs to be done. We have to be responsible citizens. We have to be responsible businesses if we want to have a country that, you know, is not lawless.
Okay.
So
what about those big businesses? You know, I'm not going to name any businesses in particular, but we know there are large businesses that oftentimes may, from time to time, lay people off or you know, make their job redundant. You know, and then you see the person still in the country. You know, or you see them go from one business place to the next. You know, what's the issue with that?
I think likewise, it's a matter of policing. Sometimes I know I can speak from the board that I've served on for the past 2 years. Last year, we introduced a new policy with regard to the switch of employer, because the law has always been clear that you can only work for the company or the individual endorsed on your work permit. But over the years, because I guess of the need for certain skill sets in our country, and I guess the ease of transition from one employer to the next versus having to go through a recruitment process and bring someone new into the country, there was a lax in regard to the law, and successive governments have allowed individuals to be able to switch employers. So what we did last year is we came up with a policy where we would not allow the switch of employers. And that was subsequently amended so that it was not hard and fast, but it gave some discretionary power to the board in instances where it was, I guess, absolutely necessary. I can tell you that some of the instances has been for professions such as teachers and culinary persons, because those particular professions, we found that when we don't have enough or adequate numbers locally in terms of belongers or islanders, as they're called now in the new ordinance. So those are areas where sometimes we've had to allow a switch. But for the most part, the board that I serve on, we've not allowed switch of employers, simply because you should only work for the person or company that brought you here, and when you're no longer with them, that person or company should be responsible according to the law and repatriate you and return your work permit card to the authorities.
So what are the consequences if they don't? Because we know what they should do, but what are the consequences if they don't?
The consequence should be that the company is fined for not repatriating you, and the individual is repatriated or deported, stop listed for breaking the law. Because, you know, I think we're very lenient in Turks and Caicos.
We're extremely lenient.
Yes,
I think we're probably the most lenient country in the Caribbean.
We allow a lot of things to happen that really and truly shouldn't happen. I don't know, maybe it's our nature to be kind, but we have a country to grow and develop, and we have to protect our country.
Now, we were talking about the cons. What are some of the pros of immigration, you know?
Well, when you think in terms of the economy, and it's necessary to have skill sets in your country. So the first pro for me would be, as chairman of the immigration board, that sometimes it's absolutely necessary to bring in a skill set. And so having a process where if you cannot find a person locally, or a skill set rather locally, there's a process that allows you to be able to bring in talent. Another pro of immigration is because of our population size, we can determine what we want our country to look like, you know, by giving permanent status, permanent residency to persons who are deserving. And I say deserving because sometimes we do issue it to persons who are not deserving, to persons who really and truly do not mean us well. But I see that in the new ordinance, some of that has also been addressed. So those are some of the pros of immigration as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, well, speaking in particular of the new ordinance, I know there's a clause in there now that from speaking to different officials that wasn't there before, where they stipulate you must be a person of good character, where in the past that they didn't have that stipulation. How much of a difference you think that will make in terms of the immigration issue, where we now stipulate before we issue you status, you have to be someone of an upstanding character?
I think it's always good to have something written in the law. Having it in practice is okay, but to have it written in the law, it really gives you teeth. And so for me, I'm happy to see it. I'm also happy to see that we can revoke status, we can revoke permanent residency now, and the ordinance covers on what grounds you can revoke it. What I would have liked to see even further is for it to be advertised in the newspaper as belong a status is, because that gives persons an opportunity to say, or have a say rather, in who is allowed to have permanent residency in their country. Because most times you can present yourself to be anything that you want to be, and it's up to the authorities reviewing the application, do the background checks, and to determine
even
for
the
themselves.
authorities need help sometimes.
Yes,
so
because there's a lot of things that may happen that they're not privy to, and so publishing it, I would welcome seeing that, publishing persons who are going to be granted status and giving the community an opportunity to say, hey, no, this person is not desirable for XYZ reason.
So before that status is granted, you would like a review process where the public has a say into whether or not, let's say, John can get this status because John is an upstanding member of the community.
Yes.
John is involved. Or whether or not people out there may know things about him that the authorities may not know.
Correct. I think that is an important part of the process that has been overlooked, and hopefully the powers that be will take that into consideration.
Yeah. Speaking of the powers that be, I mean, people get on government so much about immigration. I mean, I think immigration is our biggest issue, and I wonder sometimes, do you believe that the government takes its job in relation to immigration and controlling immigration serious?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as to say that they don't take it serious. I would never say that. But I do believe that over the years, looking back at Turks and Caicos, that there's a lot more that we could have done, a lot more that could have been invested in the area of immigration, and for whatever reason we failed to do so. But having said that, when you speak of government, I think a lot of times when you say government, immediately our attention goes to ministers. But government is
I'm thinking about the wider civil service.
You probably are, but for the listening audience, most times when you hear government, immediately your attention goes to the ministers, because that's who we hold accountable, because that's who we vote for.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
So what I would say is that while I wouldn't say that they haven't paid attention to it, what I would say is that maybe they need to be more hands-on in their approach, in terms of ensuring that what you would like to see, what your plans are, what you would like to see implemented in the country, you don't just leave it to the civil service to implement it, but you take a more hands-on approach in ensuring that it's done. Because at the end of the day, ultimately, you're responsible, and you're the one that has to come back to the community and say, hey, vote for me. So you have to ensure that whatever your vision is for the Ministry of Immigration, or whatever ministry you serve in, you ensure that it's done, even if it means you physically have to do some stuff yourself.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and I'm going to say, a lot of people often say that ministers from time to time do play a hands-on role, but it's not in the way they would like. So I'm going to ask you, do you think it's okay for ministers to micromanage? Because I think that's how a lot of people look at it when ministers kind of dabble in areas that people feel they shouldn't be dabbling in.
Well, it's human nature for us to only talk about what we want to talk about, and we paint the picture that we want portrayed. Yes, it's safe to say that sometimes dabbling is done and not in the way that paints a positive picture. But at the end of the day, dabbling should be done when I have a mandate to carry out. I was elected to carry out this mandate, and then I have a body of persons that I entrust to carry it out, but it's not being done. So what do I do then?
So here's my thing then. In that case, would it be more effective, not just from a time management point of view, but also from the point of view of implementing policies and procedures? Would it be more effective to put policies in place that hold the officers themselves accountable?
I don't think it's a lack of policy, to be honest with you. I just think, like everything else, it's a lack of policing, because I'm quite sure that
So you're saying we should police the folks that should be policing the other folks?
Well, everybody has a boss, right? And everyone answers to someone.
And that is what I'm trying to get at. Shouldn't it be where we start holding each other accountable? So the minister has to hold his PS accountable, and the PS holds the director, and so on and so on.
It's just like a business. You know, it's just like a business. You work for an organization, and everyone has a boss or a leader that they're accountable to and that they have to report to. And so every step of the way, there's a level of reporting. And when something should be done, you're given an instruction, or this is the business plan or goals of the organization, and this is what you're responsible for. If you don't deliver, there's a process to deal with you. But what we find in Turks and Caicos is that a lot of times you don't deliver and nothing is done about it. And then I may not be popular for saying this, but then the ministers are held accountable, and they're the ones that are blamed.
Okay, now I myself, I always like to speak from personal experience. Now I've gone to the immigration department where I've, whatever it is that I'm applying for, right? And I've had the situation where I went in, put in my application, gave everything, and then I came back a month later, intentionally, because I know, TCI processes take a bit of time. Right, came back a month later only to find out the person who my documents have to go to is on vacation. And so I said, so who's the next person that I would have to speak with who's filling in for this individual? And I was told, well, nobody. I said, so what do I do? Well, you have to wait till this person comes back from vacation. I said, so how long are they on vacation for? 3 months. So a month has already gone by. I have to wait a further 3 months till the person comes back from vacation to deal with my matter. Secondly, I wait until they come back from vacation. I go back to the immigration office 3 months later, and they lost my documents, right? And so I had to go and get another set of documents that they were not paying the cost for. I had to go and pay the cost myself. And I say that to say, do you think, and I know you've said it already, there hasn't been enough resources invested, but do you think that from a personnel point of view, we need to invest in more resources in terms of the human resource and in terms of the tools they use? Because I'm not the only one that has the complaint about documents being lost. Right. I know someone that had their documents lost at least 5 or 6 times over the period of 3 years.
Well, the thing of it is, those things shouldn't happen. And I don't think really and truly that it has to do with a lack of resources. I think that it's just irresponsible. And it's because, like I said earlier, there's not a level of accountability. And so when you're not accountable for your actions, you tend to do whatever. But if you're accountable, if you're held accountable for receiving documents and then not being able to locate them, if there's a repercussion for your negligence, then you'd be more prone to be responsible, wouldn't you?
That's true, but that's one aspect. What about the aspect of there not being someone else
and
trained in that area?
That is also not really truly a lack of resources, because maybe the human resources exist to have someone fill in, but maybe management didn't take the initiative or wasn't proactive enough to say, okay, I've approved this vacation for XYZ officer. Who am I going to get to cover while that person is out? So again, if I have to be held accountable as a senior manager for the department that I am responsible for, then my approach to dealing with the running of the office would be different. So we have to come to a place in Turks and Caicos where it doesn't matter if you work for the civil service, you're still to be responsible and held accountable for your actions because you are there to deliver service. And so we need to move away from, I think what I've seen over the years in Turks and Caicos is this mentality that because it's the civil service, it's something that you need from the government. So, when I get to it, I get to it, or whenever you get it. But we cannot continue in that manner. We have to get to a place where we have a first-class civil service, where the mentality is that we're here to deliver a service and to deliver excellent service. Why? Because this is our country. And so what we deliver says to people who we are.
I agree with you, but I'm still going to go back to my question. Do you think there's enough invested in terms of resources?
We can use more resources. We absolutely can, because I see in numerous government departments where we're lacking things like paper and tuna cartridge, and we have inadequate staffing. But to me, it just smells of a lack of proper management. Because I can't blame the line staff for not having those things. Someone is responsible for that office. Someone has to plan properly for the procurement of the resources, the stationery that's needed to run that office.
What if I give you an example of a situation, again, going back to my experience in dealing with the civil service, where I went into an office and the application that I needed, they didn't have any more. And they didn't have any paper or ink to print it. And they asked if they could email it to me.
Can we modernize? and I agree with emailing. Here's why.
Why not just have an e-application system that makes it easier?
We need to modernize our government departments. And I think that's the way to go, because you would spend less resources on stationery and more resources on the persons who can actually process the application, which would make the system more effective. So I'm all for paperless. I'm all for the electronic process. As a matter of fact, I think I should be able to sit at my desk at work and lodge an application, instead of having to drive to an office with a bunch of paper and then going back to check on it and to pick it up. I should receive an email to say that my application is ready for payment. We need to modernize our processes.
There's something that's something I can't blame on the everyday civil servant.
No, that is something that has to come from the higher level, the minister, the permanent secretary. This has to be a vision that, first of all, the government has.
Exactly.
And then when I say the government this time, I mean the cabinet of the Turks and Caicos. And then the permanent secretary responsible for the relevant ministry has to take that vision, share that vision with the staff, and ensure that they run with the vision.
Again, because personal experience. I've applied for things in the UK when I lived in the UK, and I've seen where things that take me, let's say 3 weeks in Turks and Caicos, takes me less than 20 minutes in the UK. I apply for it and I get it back same day in no time.
And we're a much smaller population.
And that's what I always wonder. So we should be able
to offer more efficient service.
Okay, so now going back to the idea in the issue at hand, immigration. Do you think we properly manage legal and illegal immigration? Are we doing what we should be doing? I'm not going to say we're not doing anything, but are we doing the right things?
We are doing things, and we're doing some things right. Sometimes there's more that we can do. And also sometimes there are some things that we're not doing right. But that's why it's important to hear from the public. Feedback is very important, because you may believe you're doing things right. I welcome feedback. Anytime anyone has a suggestion or they criticize me, I take it, because at the end of the day, it can only make me better. If it's negative criticism and I find that, okay, I've evaluated myself, I've evaluated the department that I'm responsible for, and I don't see what this person is saying or how this could potentially make us better, then okay, I've gone through the process and I dismiss it. But if I receive criticism and I evaluate myself and I evaluate my team and I evaluate the process and I see where it can work, then absolutely I will utilize it, because you should always be striving to become better.
Now, in that respect, I'm going to say two things, and I'm probably going to get flack for it when I get out of here. But over the years, you know, in my 30 plus years on this earth, the one department you've consistently heard complaints about, the one ministry, Immigration and Labor. And the perception is, I'm not going to say it's a reality, but I'm going to ask you, is it a reality? The perception is that it just gets worse.
Well,
is that a reality, or is that just public perception?
It's public perception. It's absolutely not a reality, because I've served in that ministry under Galmo Williams when he was the minister responsible, and I know what it was then, and I know what it is today. I can speak of the Immigration Board and even the time frame in which work permits are processed, and I can tell you that we've come a long way. But does that mean that we've arrived? Absolutely not. We still have a long way to go. But what I will say with regard to labor is a lot of times we criticize, but we don't do our part. And when I say that, I mean that there are persons who are underemployed in Turks and Caicos, but they have not registered with labor. We don't know that they exist. There are persons that apply for jobs and they don't get a response, or they're not interviewed. And we wouldn't know because they didn't inform the Labor Department that they made the application. And that's important, because I can only ask labor, as I'm speaking in terms of the Immigration Board, an application comes before me. And my first response to an application is there someone locally to fill this position? Do we have a belonger available? The labor clearance is issued. I shouldn't ask that question because the labor clearance is issued, and I should believe that if it was issued, that means that there is none. But at the end of the day, I can't take the labor clearance at face value, because I know my people. I know that they've applied for jobs and they haven't informed anyone. I know that they're looking for jobs and they haven't informed anyone. And so I have to ask questions. I have to call contacts that I may have and say, do you know anyone? I have to utilize local knowledge.
What about the situation where they've gone through all of the necessary steps? They've registered with the Labor Department, they've informed all the right authorities, and they apply for a job and they get told, and I'm speaking from an actual situation. I know two persons who this actually happened to, and they get told, you're overqualified for this job.
Well, if you're overqualified, that means that you're qualified because you met the minimum criteria for the job. You have more than the minimum criteria for the job. So really and truly, as an HR professional, I take offense to persons telling individuals that they're overqualified, because I think that is a determination that has to be made. A lot of young people
are being told that in the TCI. And when you look, there are expatriate workers filling some of those positions. I won't say all of them, but some of those positions. There are two positions in particular that come to mind where people were told, hey, you're overqualified, and then the next week you look, there's a foreign worker in filling that position.
And you're saying that those persons have gone through the process of registering with labor. Labor is aware that they've applied for the particular positions, and a labor clearance has been granted for.
You know, I don't want to create controversy, but if I tell you a situation that happened to me.
I would welcome hearing it, because
I'll use me as an example. I'll use myself as an example, right? When I was leaving the UK, I sent all of my information I had, sent to the Labor Department. I'm not blaming anyone in the Labor Department in particular. Sent to the Labor Department. Got home, saw I unemployed for a few months, right? So during that time, I happened to run into the Labor Commissioner, who said, you know, Damian, I didn't know you were home. Would you mind coming into our office and speaking with one of our officers? And I said, sure, no problem. You know, I said, let me take the opportunity, because I don't want them to say, well, we offered you the opportunity to come in and you didn't come in. And so I went in, carried my my resume, my degree, and different things like that. And so sitting down with the officer, you know, and they looked at my resume and they said, Damian, you know, the only thing we have available is in the hotel industry. And I said, that's not a problem. I said, communications is communications. It don't matter where you work. It's all the same thing. It's just from a different perspective. And so they said, well, you know, the only position you're really eligible for would probably be like public relations officer or communications director, something along those lines. I said, well, why are you telling me that like that's a problem? You know, and so when I said that, their response was, well, you know, the expats are not going to let you get that position.
Okay,
And that was the response to me.
I'm disappointed to hear that
and they didn't say it in the way I just said it. They were a little more blunt with it, and it stunned me. I couldn't even respond, to be honest. I couldn't even respond because I just was taken back by the fact that they were comfortable, because it appeared to me that they were comfortable saying it, which tells me that they've said it before. Okay, and so that I was just so taken back by the fact that they were so comfortable saying, I have no control over something I should have control over.
Well, like I said, I'm disappointed to hear that, because that's the first step in the process. And so if at the very onset, that's our approach, then...
No, I want to tell you no lie. I was turned off. I didn't even bother go back.
But having said that, I wouldn't want anyone to let that be a deterrent. What I would recommend is that be reported, because that absolutely shouldn't be the approach in placing our people on jobs. The Employment Services Unit, that's what they're called now, is responsible for receiving labor clearance applications. What that process does is like a test. It determines whether or not a potential belonger exists to fill the position in question. So first off, I think the resource necessary in that department, in terms of the placement officers, they must have a background in human resources or a similar background, because they have to be able to determine whether or not an applicant meets the qualification or criteria for the particular position. And they also have to be able to determine whether or not a job placement advertisement has been tailored to meet a specific applicant's qualifications. So those are things that we need to train our placement officers on, because they need to be able to look for these things when they're sending individuals who are belongers or permanent residents to the various companies for job interviews. That's important. And then the next step is the labor clearance, according to the law, should not be granted if such an individual exists. It should only be granted if the individual of Turks and Caicos status does not exist. That's the only time that a labor clearance should be granted.
Okay, so now let me ask you, from a immigration perspective, the new ordinance, the work permit process. Take us through that process. What's the pros and cons of that process?
Well, I am absolutely happy to see the new process, because it's specific about what has to come in with an application now. Beforehand, we had, as a matter of practice, been deferring a lot of applications for things like summary of belonger interviews, copies of the resumes of belonger applicants, just to be able to determine whether or not this application is tailored to bring in a work permit holder versus hiring the available belongers. So now the ordinance sets out that when you're making an application, it's the responsibility of the company making the application to provide all of the information. That includes all of the applications received, the proof of the qualifications of the person you're applying for. It includes the salary information. It includes the interview notes, all of those things. So if you had 5 applicants, 1 work permit holder and 4 belongers, then you need to send in the notes from those interviews. And what that does now, because it's a requirement, if your application comes in without it, it will automatically be refused, because there'll no longer be deferrals asking you for it. It forms a part of the application. And the good thing about that is it gives the board an opportunity. Maybe labor might have missed something. It gives the board now an opportunity to contact those individuals and hear from them. Were you interviewed? Okay, what happened in the interview? Just to verify that the information I'm receiving from this company is correct and it's not some fabricated story that they're presenting in order to secure a work permit.
So what about, let's go to the individual who they may bring in. Now, we know that there are numerous job adverts within papers in the TCI. I mean, on a consistent basis, there are hundreds weekly. we've seen where some job adverts, and you said it, you want to make sure that the advert isn't tailored to bring in an individual, right? I've seen where you had an advert. I'll go to one advert in particular I saw. Not recently. This was about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe, right? There was one advert where a company was asking for a receptionist. And I always tell people this story because I find it so funny. And for the receptionist, they was asking for a degree. They didn't specify in what. They just said must have a degree, must have 10 years experience, and must speak 3 languages, French, English, and I think the other one was Spanish. Now, I say that because clearly there's no local or Turks and Caicos Islander that is going to meet the requirement of having 10 years experience as a receptionist, a degree, and speak 3 languages and want to be a receptionist. Nobody with those sorts of skills will want to be a receptionist. It's
obvious that it's tailored, and they're probably more than likely not a receptionist. More than likely, that is just an attempt to get a work permit at a lower cost for a much higher level skill. But having said that, labor doesn't have to issue the labor clearance because they can look if you're trained enough to vet an application, you can look at it and determine that this is tailored. You can call that company in, you can question them, and then determine whether or not they're genuine or whether or not they're trying to mislead the department into issuing a labor clearance. And when you find companies that are disingenuous, you're bold enough to do that, then you shouldn't do business with them. You should make it clear to them that everything that you present to us now will be scrutinized. Because we cannot believe you. Our trust in you is now gone.
Okay, well, let's go to the hotel industry, right? And I get a lot of, I hear a lot of complaints from hotel industry workers that say, our hotel is bringing in workers under or with a lower cost work permit, let's say as a bartender, and he's actually the bar manager.
Yeah, I know. I don't know how much of it happens now, but I know over the years that has been a practice in not only the hospitality industry, but in many companies in Turks and Caicos, where to save costs, they would put in an application in a lower category and have the person working in a higher position. But the thing about it is it's illegal, and it goes right back to what I initially said. If we were to invest resources in the areas of our weakness, which is policing, it would make everything so much better, because we should have labor inspectors visiting the various business places, and they would see firsthand. They'll be able to see people wear name tags. You don't even have to ask. You can go and show up and see what a person is doing on a job and say, well, listen, this individual's work permit says bartender, but they're here supervising the bar staff, and there's a $10,000 fine.
What about situations like, and I find this very funny. What about situations where, let's say they bring in someone, and we know it's happened in the past, where companies, I'm not just going to say the hotel industry, companies have brought in people on a temporary work permit, right? Bring them in maybe once or twice on a temporary work permit with the intention of giving them a permanent job, and then they just apply for the permanent work permit, and they've been granted. What about situations
that has happened
like
a lot over the years? It has happened a lot over the years, and some of it, to be fair, some of it was caused or created as a result of the time that it takes to process an application. So looking back, I like to be fair. Looking back over the years, and maybe the last 14 years, when you look at how things used to be and how difficult it was to get an application processed in a timely manner, companies resorted to using the loophole in the law to apply for temporaries and then transition to the actual work permit. So now the new ordinance addresses that. That will not be able to happen. A temporary is exactly what it should be, which is a company needing a specific skill set that is not available in Turks and Caicos and having to bring it in for a short period of time to carry out one function. And when that particular function is done, that individual leaves. That individual cannot make an application for a work permit because there's no transition from a temporary work permit to an actual full year work permit. And the law now clearly states that, so there's no more loophole.
Okay, going back to another issue that I know is a very sore spot for a lot of Turks and Caicos Islanders, the issue of understudying. We've seen, or rather you've heard stories where people say, you know, I'm supposed to be understudying this person, but this person works in this office and I work in the other office. You know, how does immigration and labor solve that problem where somebody's supposed to be understudying one individual, but they work in two different locations? How can you understudy that person?
Well, the answer to that is simple. One of the things that we've practiced on the Immigration Board over the last 2 years is when you list an understudy, we communicate with them. Now, it's up to them to be honest. A lot of times people are fearful because they feel like they're going to be victimized.
I know.
I tell them, you can't be victimized. If you are victimized, the law covers that. You know, so we need to move away from being afraid to speak up about what's happening.
But how do we encourage people not to be afraid? Because I've heard of situations where people were pressured into writing a response to the board to say, oh, I need this person to stay because I haven't learned the necessary skills and so forth. And I can remember one person even came and asked me to write a letter for them. And I told them, I said, you do realize this is illegal. If you don't feel like...
Okay, so here's the thing. Then you may be afraid. But even if you're afraid and you write the letter, you can find, I mean, this is Turks and Caicos. Everybody knows every board member. And even if you have to call someone on the side and say, listen, these people forced, now I'm going to get very colloquial. These people forced me to write this letter and I did it because I need my job. But in reality, they ain't training me. And I just did it because I was afraid they were going to fire me. Okay? And the board can very discreetly deal with a situation like that without that person having to be victimized or to cause them to feel like they're going to be victimized. And it's unfortunate that people would feel that they have to resort to that. But if you really and truly feel that way, there's always an avenue that you can take to have something dealt with. I would prefer that our people would be bold enough and fearless enough to say, no, I'm not writing it because you're not training me. And let the company fight their battle on their own and not use you. But not everyone is going to go that route. So we always have to have an avenue for persons to be able to deal with situations.
Okay. Now, I know that illegal immigration is again, a sore spot, you know. Do you think that this ordinance sufficiently addresses the issue of illegal immigration?
I think the ordinance does address the situation with illegal immigration. There have been a few changes. Previously, the complaint that you got most from task force was that you apprehend individuals and then you have to go through a process before you can charge them or repatriate them. And so now that makes it easier for them to be able to carry out their duties. I think previously the process, the court process and being bogged down in the court system, things took a lot longer. And now there are certain powers that have been extended, and it will certainly assist them in carrying out their duties. And the other thing is, I think as a nation, as a people, if I could say anything to our people, it would be, don't sell your country out. You know, if you harbor an illegal, or if you call a task force officer or someone or some the higher power and say, man, please tell them release this person who has broken the law in Turks and Caicos, this person who has been hiding out in your country for numerous years without a work permit, without any proper immigration status. You're saying to them that it's okay to break the laws in my country, that you don't need to respect the laws of Turks and Caicos. You can do whatever you like and we'll still embrace you and you'll still be here. So you create an atmosphere and an environment of criminal activity. what it is. And we have to be real about these issues because they may seem small and insignificant, but there is a larger picture that we have to look at. And so we, as a people, we need to become responsible and not condone that type of activity in our country.
What about those individuals who may not be able to control the fact that they are here? And I say that from the standpoint of children, which has been a contentious issue over many years. You know, where, let's say a child was brought to the Turks and Caicos, 1 month, 2 months old. They're now 14, 15, 16, 18 years old.
Well,
what do you do in that situation?
Unfortunately, a child can't be held accountable for the actions of their parents. They're the innocent party in the midst of
but they still need some sort of legal status or status within the country. But
and I think
let's say you have a situation where the parent has some sort of status, whether they're a work permit holder or PRC, but they've never done anything for the child.
Right. I'm one who believes that the child should not be penalized for the actions of the parent. If you want to go after the parent and prosecute the parent, fine, but the child should not be stateless, because you have instances where children were born here, parents on work permit, they have an unskilled work permit, the child can't be endorsed, the child stays here for 18 years without any form of status, and then what?
Because we know that we do have quite a substantial number of these children within our communities. So how do we solve this situation?
Well, I think that as much as some of us will not like it, we cannot penalize the children for the actions of their parents. We cannot. So we would have to assist those children who, if I've stayed in a country for 18 years, have never left Turks and Caicos, I grew up here, went to school here, all of my friends are here, know nothing about my parents' country, I think some form of status should be given to persons who fall in that category.
Okay, because I know a Dominican national, right? A child. She was 18. She's been here all her life since she was about 2 years old. And she recently had to go back to the Dominican Republic where she knew no one. The good thing is at least she spoke the language, but she knew no one. She knew nobody there. Her mother lives here. Her sisters and brothers live here, but she has no legal status because she came here at a very young age. And so I think she went to apply for a job, and that's when she found out, and they told her, well, we can't give you this job.
No, because she wouldn't have had a legal status in the country. It's unfortunate. And again, it goes right back to policing. If we'd caught it early, it would not have escalated that. But because we've been so relaxed in terms of policing, we've created a situation where now we need to deal with the issue. And personally, I think it is not right for us to then say, go home after you've spent 18 years here as a child, not an adult. If you were an adult, I would say extend the full extent of the law, because you know what you're doing, you made the decision, and you have to live with the repercussions of your actions. But a child, the child had no say in the decision made. They're the innocent party.
So that's going to take me into this question, in the issue of legal and illegal immigration, because this is a complex issue, because you have, in one instance, you may have a parent who may be legally here, but the child, by instance, isn't legal. So do you think that we need to have a separate or rather a clear written out population growth policy alongside the immigration ordinance?
I have been an advocate for a clear population policy for as long as I can remember. I think we need to determine what we want our country to look like. And let's be honest with ourselves. We have a very small indigenous population. I had a conversation today actually with a gentleman, a Turks and Caicos Islander, and we were talking about the exact same thing. And his approach was that we were talking about being able to serve. And his approach is that only indigenous Turks and Caicos Islanders should hold public office. And I differ, because he was shocked to find out that I was not born in Turks and Caicos. I was born in the Bahamas.
Actually, the majority of our, I would say, 30s to 50-year-olds, you find that quite a few of them are born in the Bahamas
Yes.
and not actually in Turks and Caicos.
Yes.
And if we were to take that route, we would exclude a whole generation of people.
Exactly. And that's the exact same thing that I said to him. I said, you know, if you were to go that route, we wouldn't have anybody to serve, because we would quickly run out of numbers, because the number of indigenous Turks and Caicos Islanders is so small that we need to ensure, and I'm glad that the immigration status bill does address that. So we ensure that our people who have Turks and Caicos parentage, and in some instances grandparentage, that they're given belonger status, and they're able to contribute to this country. Because God forbid if we didn't do it, we're outnumbered in any event, even with those of us who were born overseas to Turks and Caicos parents. Can you imagine if me, who was born to Turks and Caicos parents, but not born here myself, wasn't given status? Then that would mean that, like you said, an entire generation of belongers wouldn't exist.
Do you think we do a good job of encouraging the diaspora, the TCI diaspora, to come back and play a role within the country?
I think in some instances we're bitter. We feel that those persons who left us, that when things were not good, they left and they made a life elsewhere, and so they're not entitled to return and to reap the benefits of our forefathers who decided to stay. I don't take that approach, because I feel like I look at Turks and Caicos, the face of Turks and Caicos as it exists today, and I feel that I would much rather see those Turks and Caicos Islanders who made a life elsewhere return home, versus issuing work permits to persons of various nationalities who know nothing about Turks and Caicos, who has no lineage to Turks and Caicos, no passion for Turks and Caicos, and they become permanent residents and belongers in Turks and Caicos as a virtue of marriage, because that's basically the only way they could get it. I think it would make more sense for us to bring our own people home and let them help us at this stage to grow and develop Turks and Caicos into what we would like to see it become. And having said that, we need to determine as a nation what the face of Turks and Caicos is going to be. And if I had to determine, I would tell you, I would bring them all home, because they would have a passion for Turks and Caicos, and they would give the best that they have to offer to Turks and Caicos.
Now, with that said, I want to ask you two more questions before we get out of here. In that instance, right, do you think there should be a separate, a complete separate path for citizenship in terms of, because we've seen where persons have been extended work permit for, I know one individual who told me, I don't know if it's true, who told me he was on a work permit for 20 years, you know, and then eventually after 20 years, and in his 20-year time, he kind of assimilated, but not really, because he still had difficulty speaking English even after 20 years.
Well, I wouldn't grant him status.
So here's what I'm asking. Do you think there should be a separate path for a TCI status when you come and you declare from the outset, I would like to live here, this is what I want, and then you put yourself on a path to citizenship, which should be completely separate from the work permit?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as to completely agree with you, but I would say this. Definitely, your path to citizenship in Turks and Caicos should have very little to do with the fact that you were here on work permit.
Because that's how we've been giving it for the last couple of years, because people have been, there hasn't been a limitation to work permits.
Well, according to the ordinance, the only way that you can get it now would be if you were married to a belonger, or one that I don't completely agree with, but the other is for British nationals who would have been here for 10 years and received permanent residence, and then 5 years after having received permanent residence, they can make application for belonger status. I don't particularly subscribe to that, but like I said, I don't think the work permit is the pathway to citizenship. I would give someone who's been in Turks and Caicos
essentially what I'm asking
10 years.
Does this bill address the fact that...
No, it doesn't address enough the pathway to
So would you,
citizenship.
would you still be able to get citizenship after 10 consecutive work permits?
No. It addresses it in that regard. What I just said to you is that there are only two ways now.
Okay.
And the way is by marriage to a belonger, or if you're a British national who has been in Turks and Caicos for 10 years, received permanent residency, and 5 years later, you can then make application for belonger status. But like I said, I don't particularly subscribe to the latter. But what I would like to say is that work permits shouldn't determine whether we give you status. It means nothing, really and truly. I'm sorry. It means absolutely nothing. You benefited from being here financially. And so what I look for when I'm going to determine whether or not someone should be granted status in my country is how active they were in the community. What have you done in Turks and Caicos to leave a legacy? What have you done or contributed while you were here? How did you make the lives of Turks and Caicos Islanders better? Who did you mentor? Who can you look at and say that I've trained this person, I've invested in this person, look at this product that I have helped to mold and to create in Turks and Caicos? That's a person that I would be keen on.
Someone who shows their heart.
Absolutely.
Is in the country.
I need to see the passion for Turks and Caicos in an individual that I want to say can stand next to me and say, I am a Turks and Caicos Islander. Otherwise, I'm not interested in having you as a citizen in my country.
You know, I could continue this conversation forever. You're giving me a lot here, and I just want to go back to the issue of the kids. So, with what you just said, from the standpoint of the child, would you say we would be better off from an immigration standpoint if we just gave all of those children that are already in the country and obtained a certain age, who've been here for so many years, if we just say we give those children amnesty and you can apply for citizenship within this period of time?
Yes, I think there should be established a time period, and we should say if you meet XYZ criteria and you've been here for 18, 20 years, went through the school system, all of this, you look at how active they were in school, involved in sports and whatever, academics, whatever, and then you say, okay, we're going to grant 500 citizenships to these students. That's the future of Turks and Caicos.
Because I can tell you from the aspect of sports, we have a lot of students that play on the national team that are on Turks and Caicos Islanders.
Yes, and I would absolutely give them citizenship because they bring something to Turks and Caicos that we may not have here among our indigenous people. And they're passionate about Turks and Caicos.
The idea of granting outright citizenship from birth, which is an idea I know that has been proposed. Do you think that's a good one, or that is one perhaps for another time?
I think that requires a lot of debate. I think a lot of Turks and Caicos Islanders will not agree to it, and I can understand why, absolutely. It has its pros and cons, but we would need another hour to discuss that.
All right, and with that said, my last question, what do you think is the biggest problem facing the TCI in regards to immigration, and how do you propose we solve it?
Like I said earlier, our biggest issue is the policing of the laws that we have on the book and making sure that we put resources in the right places to ensure that the law is known and that when it's broken, that we go after people to the full extent of the law and make people to know that, listen, you can't come in Turks and Caicos, break the laws, and think that we're going to grant you citizenship after. We have to make sure that we police who's in our country, and when they are disrespectful to our laws and remain here illegally, knowing that they don't have the status, we go after them, we go after the employers, and we make people to know that we will not tolerate that in Turks and Caicos.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Wilson. And of course, we want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in, and I want to wish you guys a wonderful and very blessed Thursday afternoon. Of course, it's time to get back to work for most of you. For those of you who may be working shift work, whether you're working the hotels or any other job, I wish you an enjoyable, peaceful, and restful day. Have a great day, guys. All the best.
We are a chosen generation, called for to show that all I require for life be